Well, I am so excited to have with us today a true hero of this republic, a humble hero, but a hero nonetheless. James O'Keefe is the founder, CEO, and chairman of the board of Project Veritas, perhaps the most effective nonprofit on the national scene. As you know, Project Veritas investigates and exposes all manner of corruption, dishonesty, self-dealing, waste, fraud, and all kinds of other misconduct in both public and private institutions. People live in fear of Project Veritas, and if they're living in fear of Project Veritas and James O'Keefe, it means they are up to no good. James has built an extraordinary organization of citizen journalists who are doing the work the corrupt propaganda press will not. Their website is projectveritas.com, so please go check them out and support them however you can. James also has a blockbuster new book out about his and Project Veritas's decade plus of investigative reporting. It's called American Muckraker. Go get it right now. You're going to love this, and it's such an important book. James joins me now. Hi, James.
Hey, Monica. Great to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you here, and we saw each other over the weekend, and I thought we were long past due for this conversation. So I appreciate your taking the time. First, James, because of your work and Project Veritas's work in exposing the dark underbelly of so many institutions, from corporate America to the press and beyond, you really are a national hero. And yet I know you well enough to know that you wear that mantle with great humility. Why is that?
Well, Monica, I appreciate you saying that. And just by way of introduction, I'm in a car and I'm on the phone, so if it's a little static once in a while, I apologize. I think the humility comes from being a leader of an organization. Anybody who, I run an organization, I run a company, it's a nonprofit organization, it's still an organization, it's a team of people. And there's a constant burden to earn the respect of the people that work with me, a constant burden to raise the money to pay their salaries and pay the lawyers, and a constant burden to keep going. You never rest on your laurels. So it's a very punishing and it's a very punishing and deeply humbling life. Not to mention the constant attacks against your character, raids by the FBI and defamation by the media. It's so punishing. I would submit to you it's the reason why nobody else does it, really.
Yeah.
Work that we do, because you kind of have to like pain if you're in it for the wrong reasons. Of course, the reasons that we're in it, reasons I think I'm in it, is because I'm an artist. I'm passionate about storytelling. I love the aspects of the storytelling, and I'll endure any pain in order to do what I love. So that's in a nutshell why I think it's being the leader of Project Veritas is humbling.
Well, I know you. I have known you for a couple of years now, and I do know that you've got a very thick skin. I know that human beings are not necessarily born with thick skins. They are developed over time after being pummeled, as you certainly have over so many years. But I also know that you are a genuinely good person. You're a genuinely good soul, kind and decent, smart and fierce and tough, but you are a genuinely good person. Tell us a little bit about your background, James. Where did you grow up and how were you raised?
I grew up in northern New Jersey, Bergen County, Westwood, New Jersey, which is just near New York City, suburbs of New York City. My mother was a physical therapist, and as a young child, like 4 or 5 years old, she would drive me into the city where she worked in the Bronx in a nursing home. My father was an engineer and carpenter, and he renovated homes. And he bought his first house with no money, fixed it up, refinanced it, bought a second house. And in that process, this is late 80s, early 90s, as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old boy, I would help my grandfather and father renovate these homes, doing everything ourselves, literally everything, roofing, plumbing, mowing lawns, handing them 2x4s. That was my childhood up until the age of 18. And that really taught me, I think, hard work. My dad was a very driven man, so much so that on the work site, we probably didn't even really talk to each other. We were just working the whole time. And my mother was a very artistic person and very very sweet woman and shy, but very well balanced in terms of her views on justice and the world. And I wouldn't say my parents were very conservative, and politically at least, but I think they were very well balanced people and gave me a good down to earth view of the world. They were both from upstate New York, so sort of from Appalachia up in upstate New York. So that was my upbringing. And then I went to college at Rutgers, and that's where I kind of confronted the political correctness on campus and started my own newspaper at Rutgers University when I was 19 years old.
It's just such an extraordinary story. You know, the left loves to highlight American dream stories on their side, but they'll ignore the American dream stories on our side, whether it's Clarence Thomas or someone like you. And you tell a lot of these stories in your new book, American Muckraker, which, by the way, is an extraordinary memoir and also call to action. It's just a fantastic book. Everybody, please go get it. And what struck me is, you know, when you were talking about your early life, either now or in the book, those kinds of values that you were raised with, I am afraid they're becoming a little bit more rare in America today. But you point out that your parents were not particularly political. That, you know, they probably voted, you know, and they paid attention to current events just like my parents did. And they talked about current events. But you and I grew up in a time, maybe a little different time, but it was a time in America where politics did not infect every aspect of our lives, from sports to the culture, movies. We weren't getting lectured every 5 minutes, and people really had, I think, a much healthier existence back then. Politics was a part of their lives, but it wasn't all of their lives. And those kinds of values that you were raised with, James, I think really echo through all of your work.
Yes, well, I'm 38 years old. I graduated high school in 2002. In high school, and rather in middle school in New Jersey, I can't remember anyone bringing up politics once. I didn't endure any of that. What we're exposing now at Project Veritas in the schools, particularly after Trump was elected, where people are talking about anarchy and removing Christianity everywhere from everything. I didn't endure that. I had a pretty well-balanced public school education. But things have certainly changed since I went to school in the 90s. My parents were not political. I think the first concept of politics that I ever remember enduring was when I was in ninth grade. I read George Orwell's Animal Farm. Again, 1999 was the year. Give you some historical perspective. So some 23 years ago. And I remember that saying, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Yes.
When Orwell wrote those words, that affected me, but I never had any lived context to apply what that meant. Now, of course, it seems to me is that the issue at hand of our day, the weaponization of the Justice Department, raids against journalists at Project Veritas, selective law enforcement agencies targeting people due to their politics. This is like the issue in our country that we're dealing with. I think it's the most important thing. It motivated me then. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't have an understanding of the context of that quote that Orwell wrote about in his fictional dystopian, communist book, Animal Farm. But when I got to college at Rutgers University in New Jersey, suddenly things became very political. I was surrounded by political correctness. I was surrounded by professors' doors decorated with propaganda, environmentalist policy on their front door, and people talking about how great Joseph Stalin was, and Paul Robeson, who was a Stalinist, who was a Rutgers University alumnus. There were statues erected in his name, but no statues erected in the name of Milton Friedman, who himself was a Rutgers graduate, Nobel Prize winner, but no statues. And I was confronted with this, what I called an imbalance, an injustice. Not so much I was a right winger or a left winger. I just felt it was out of balance. And that's what prompted me to do something. And that's what prompted these videos. I started doing these walk-in video reports on campus, which would years later become Project Veritas.
So that was the initial embryonic idea for Project Veritas. Did you have any interest in journalism? Did you idolize journalists? Did you have any journalistic heroes like Mike Wallace growing up? And did you think that you wanted a more traditional path into journalism?
Great question. I did not go. People always say, what journalism school did you go to? And my response to that is, well, I don't even know what they teach in journalism school anymore.
Yeah.
I didn't go to journalism school. I think it was Mike Wallace, legendary 60 Minutes, now deceased, who, in a preface of a book called Raising Hell, which is about investigative reporting, which I read, he said, you learn more in 3 months on the job than you do in 4 months of 4 years of journalism school, which is totally correct. I learned everything by doing. I started a news magazine. I modeled the layout after National Review magazine, but it was all focused on local reporting, and I learned by doing. And I failed, and I picked myself up, and I designed the whole thing myself. I edited the copy. I learned at the time it was Adobe InDesign, Adobe PageMaker, and then later Final Cut 7. I just went out and did it. In terms of people that I looked up to, it wasn't really. I watched a lot of local reporting. I read the New York Times every day. I read the USA Today. I read the Star Ledger, which was New Jersey's local paper. But I actually looked to some interesting, some interesting models. There was a group called the Yes Men, which was sort of an agitprop group. They would sort of punk people by pretending to be something else. And they did this thing where they went into a Halliburton oil conference, Halliburton gasoline, the company, and they wore these survivor costumes to survive global warming. And these oil executives, which were all Republicans, right-wing people, were entertaining the idea that they need to purchase these ridiculous survival suits to survive global warming. And I thought it was interesting that these left-wing pranksters were exposing the, I guess you could call the hypocrisies of people on the right, which it certainly was a form of hypocrisy. And I decided, well, let me apply that, but to other things. And I went into my dean's office with a box of Lucky Charms and tried to expose the fact. They said, well, Lucky Charms are racist against the Irish. Myself being Irish American, I went in there with a straight face and a hidden camera. The year was 2005. That was the first undercover video I did, Lucky Charms are racist against the Irish. And I put them in this horrible situation where the dean had to either agree with me, which is absurd, or not take me seriously and upset the campus rules, which say you have to take everyone's racial grievances seriously. And they chose the better of those two paths, and they chose to ban Lucky Charms on the grounds they're racist against the Irish.
So you that was your first foray into this, James.
That was the first foray, and then it was immediately followed by some other videos I did. I confronted these professors over how decorated their doors were with propaganda. I published all the salaries of the professors. This is a state university at Rutgers. And then after graduation, I met a girl named Lila Rose at UCLA, and we went into Planned Parenthood in Santa Monica, California. And the Planned Parenthood officials were telling me how to get an illegal abortion, lie about her age. She said she was 14, and they told her to say that she was 16 or something over a certain age, so that it wouldn't be statutory rape. And that really became a national story. It was not a big story, but it was a national story. Got on O'Reilly Factor. And then after that, I did the story on Acorn. Everyone knows that one.
Yes.
That was the pimp and prostitute going in. I met Hannah Giles, the young woman who did that story. She was 20 years old because she was inspired by what I did with Lila. She messaged me with this idea to go into Acorn pretending to be a pimp and a prostitute. And then Congress defunded Acorn as a result of our expose. And of course, the rest is history. Suddenly, everyone knew that this genre of journalism, this undercover agitprop, undercover investigative reporting, everyone kind of knew how effective it was, how important it was, and they wanted me to do it in every city in the country.
Okay, James, please stand by. A lot more to cover with you coming up. But okay, we're back with the great James O'Keefe. You know, it's just amazing. I remember that acorn story, and that was your first huge victory. The whole thing with Project Veritas is a David and Goliath kind of story because you're like a shoestring operation and you're doing it out of just the sheer desire for decency and honesty, transparency, accountability in this culture and in our society. And you go up against these huge corporate Goliaths or the federal government, which is the ultimate corporate Goliath. And you do it on a shoestring. And that victory really set Project Veritas on this national trajectory, which also really put you in the crosshairs, which I want to get to in just a second. What do you consider your biggest expose?
That's a question that is subjective because it's going to depend upon what people are most passionate about. I actually think, and I want to speak in recent terms because I can go back 3 to 6 years with some big ones. We did the Jeffrey Epstein, Amy Robach story. That was massive. That shattered. I mean, that was earth shattering.
Yes.
The hashtag Epstein didn't kill himself. But I actually think the most important work we've done is recently in the last year in the schools with teachers and principals being exposed and being fired. There is the one in Sacramento with the anarchist teacher. He was fired. And that prompted school board meetings in Sacramento. That was right before the Glenn Youngkin phenomenon in Virginia. We did one recently in Connecticut with Jeremy Boring, who is an assistant principal in Greenwich, Connecticut, a suburb of New York City. And he said he doesn't hire Catholics. He doesn't hire people over the age of 30. This is an assistant principal, does not know he's being reported. That prompted outrage. And I think that we're very divided in this country right after these midterms. It seems like people are talking about this. We're just so divided. And what's the solution to that division? We try to find issues where people can agree. And Monica, what was interesting about the Connecticut story that we did a couple months ago with Jeremy Boring is that a Democratic attorney general launched a civil rights investigation, not into Project Veritas, but into what we exposed. And it was like an issue where everyone kind of agreed, okay, this is wrong. We shouldn't discriminate against people in the hiring process due to their religion. So I think the most powerful work that Veritas has done, Monica, is the work that, whether it's Jeffrey Epstein or Don't Mess with Our Children in Connecticut, are the issues that bring people together. And I think journalism, real investigative reporting, has a huge responsibility for uniting people around these issues of consensus in our society. And I think we have more in common than maybe people would like to admit.
I love that point, and I hope it's true. I really do. I hope it's true. I remember when I was working with President Nixon in the last years of his life, James, he often said, look, the media, and remember, this is like 25 years ago, he said, the media is so biased to the left. It's a miracle we get anything covered. It's a miracle Republicans get elected to anything. But he did say that reporters will report a story, even if it's a negative one, on Democrats, because the story in the end trumps everything for them. And again, that was about 25 years ago. I don't think that holds true anymore. I think that the propaganda press is so deeply entrenched with the Democrats and the left, it really is an organ of them, and that they will bury, and you've proved this with Project Veritas, they will go and bury stories rather than run out there, expose people on the left and win a Pulitzer Prize. They would rather not have the Pulitzer Prize, but protect their ideological compatriots and their ideological agenda. Do you agree with that?
Partially. I have to be an optimist in that if the story is strong enough, it'll force the media to cover it. And that's why I agree with it if it's words only, but that's why Veritas does visual. So I think if the story is strong enough and it's visually compelling enough, I actually think there's hope. It's very difficult, though, and it's very difficult for people to get beyond the barrier to entry in journalism. Putting a clip on Twitter, putting a clip on Instagram, if it's strong enough, it'll force a reaction by the powers that be, which will in turn force the media to talk about it. Another example, Monica, I would say, to Nixon's point, the ACLU came out and defended Project Veritas after the FBI raid, which evokes audible gasps from conservatives. Like, they can't believe that the American Civil Liberties Union would defend me, but they did. because it was just crossing a Rubicon so crazy that you would forcibly take journalists' notebooks from them because you don't like them. That's what the Biden administration has done. That's what Merrick Garland. I mean, we don't know whether Merrick Garland personally approved of the raid against myself. The law says he has to in a case like this. Garland would later put out a memo. This was actually last month, saying that it's not okay for the Department of Justice to forcibly remove reporters' notes from journalists just because in an investigation into their activities in the scope of news gathering. But this goes back to the George Orwell point I brought to you when I read in ninth grade, that some animals are equal and some are more equal than others. I'm sure that people would not consider Project Veritas journalists. But I think it is possible to form consensus in society if the story is strong enough.
Well, that's very hopeful. And I hope that you're right. I think we've seen certain examples of that, James, and you have certainly forced the propaganda press to cover a lot of stories that they otherwise would not have. So kudos to you. Let's talk a little bit about the blowback that you've received over the years. Once your stories go public and once you had the Acorn story, of course, that put you right in the crosshairs. But you have been smeared, attacked. You've been raided by the FBI over the Ashley Biden story. Tell us a little bit about that, because that is just a complete horror show. And when people hear this, they cannot believe that happened in the United States.
Yeah, it's a long story that would probably require 30 minutes of exposition, but I'm going to try to do it in 60 seconds. This is over the Ashley Biden diary, the diary belonging to the daughter of the president, and a source had tipped us off about this, and we met with these tipsters, and we decided not to publish the diary because I couldn't confirm its authenticity with 100% certainty, and even if I could confirm its authenticity, I couldn't confirm that what Ashley Biden wrote in the diary actually occurred. I chose not to publish it, but I did reach out to Joe Biden for comment, reached out to his daughter for comment. Ashley Biden's daughter sent our request for comment to the FBI, Department of Justice, who then, unbeknownst to me at the time, this is in 2020, obtained secret warrants against Microsoft, Google, Uber for all of my information. And secret warrants are very rarely used, and they're never used against journalists. They were attempted to be used in the Trump administration against the New York Times, but that was backed off of. And these warrants were executed. They got all my emails, unbeknownst to me. One of the things on the search warrant for that was extortion, or blackmail, which I suppose was related to my request for comment. A request for comment is by no means blackmail. In any event, a year later, they raided my two journalists. On the warrant there, it said transportation of stolen material across state lines. This was, I guess, the diary. But again, it's not illegal for a journalist to receive a document, even if that document was stolen, as long as the journalist played no part in the theft of that document. We didn't think it was stolen. Even if it was later alleged to be, there's nothing illegal about a journalist publishing a stolen document. In fact, the New York Times and Washington Post do that every day. So when they came to my home 2 days after my reporters' homes on November 5th, 2021, about a year ago, they had a battering ram, they had guns, they had, vests, FBI jackets. At 6 a.m. on a Saturday, a battering ram. I opened the door. They put me in handcuffs, and they took my two iPhones. And we all know what's on our iPhones: source material, reporter material, lawyer material, confidential material. Monica, this happened a year ago. No charges have been filed. No one has been indicted. I have not been at my team. We don't know. This is just sort of ongoing at this point. We filed a motion with the judge to get our stuff back. The ACLU, the Reporters Committee, left-wing journalists, society professional journalists, almost the entire media has come out and said that this is wrong. This should not happen in the United States of America. Merrick Garland has said that this should not happen. He wasn't referring to us, but he was referring generally to the notion of raids against journalists and forcing reporters to hand over their notebooks. But nothing has happened, and I've testified before members of Congress about it, and this matter just remains ongoing.
This is the FBI and the DOJ. You and I were talking about this right at the start of our conversation. The most dangerous threat we face is the weaponization of our own government against us. And you, right there with that story, you have become an enemy of the state with your work. And that story just illustrates exactly what we're up against here.
Well, it was a terrifying thing. I mean, I've written a whole book about my first arrest by the FBI. It's called Breakthrough. I was exonerated, but it's terrifying beyond imagination. I mean, it's designed to terrorize you. And frankly, the punishment is the process, the legal bills. I mean, Veritas runs a nonprofit foundation. We have a $20+ million budget. 1/3 of that is legal bills, which is, we have so many lawyers to deal with this. And it becomes Kafkaesque. You do everything lawfully, you do everything legally, but they don't think that you're a journalist. The prosecutor said in one of the motions before the judge, Your Honor, Project Veritas is not journalism because they don't get consent in their video recordings when they record people, which is an argument that's so absurd that they would say that, but they did. So the experience of being handcuffed in your apartment, you wonder if they're willing to cross that Rubicon, if you will, if they're willing to do that sort of thing. What other things are they willing to do? Are they willing to plant evidence on you, plant drugs on you? And when you haven't broken the law, it's actually more terrifying. The New York Times published leaked attorney-client memos days after the raid. Gee, I wonder how they obtained those. And the memos actually made us look good. It said we don't break the law, and they were advising us how to do things. But the fact that we have a New York Times organization that's working in concert with the FBI, that's coordinating with federal agents, that they're acting as the spokesperson for the federal agencies instead of investigating them, that contributes to the terror, to know that our fourth estate is not holding these agencies accountable. And I think that Congressman Jordan, who wrote a letter to Merrick Garland about our case just last week, said that he's sending out preservation letters if and when he becomes the ranking member for the Oversight Committee. I mean, it's terrifying, Monica, and it's something that you have to kind of endure, and you have to be willing to keep going no matter what. Project Veritas, whether the New York Times likes to admit it or not, is fighting for their First Amendment rights, and it's pretty tragic that they don't stand up for the rights. They're one of the only entities in America that has not said that this is wrong what the FBI is doing to Project Veritas.
You know, James, you said something important, and I want to disagree with you respectfully on one point you said. You said that they don't consider you to be a journalist. They don't consider Project Veritas to be journalism. I disagree with you. I think that they are radical leftists, but they're not stupid. They know exactly what you are and who you are and the work that you do. They do consider you journalists and a journalist and doing journalism, and you're doing the wrong kind of journalism. So they are sicking the most fearsome agency of the federal government, the FBI, the DOJ, on you in order to intimidate you, bankrupt you, and crush you, to dissuade you from getting off the scent and doing these stories, exposing all of their corruption. They know you're a journalist. That's why you're in the crosshairs.
Well, I mean, we're in uncharted waters. I think that a lot of people, this is the first question I get asked usually about the FBI raid, not about the journalism that we're doing. So to a certain extent, it's not working because it hasn't stopped Project Veritas. We're producing more stories than ever. I think a lot of people look at us and probably view us as, frankly, the FBI raid legitimized us to a certain extent because it as Winston Churchill said, you can tell a man's virtues by his enemies, if you will, and his vices by his friends. So the fact that we have the full weight and force of the federal government coming after us means that we must be doing something right. And Lord knows if there was something illegal that I had ever done, which I don't break the law, that would have been leaked to the New York Times by now.
Right.
So they have nothing because there is nothing illegal. I've been so careful, Monica, since 2010. That's another story for another day. My arrest and subsequent vindication in New Orleans, Louisiana. I wrote a book called Breakthrough about those U.S. attorneys, those prosecutors writing about me on blogs and making things up, and they were eventually disbarred for their behavior. I've been so careful. I live my life like there are 12 people always watching. I run everything through a litany of attorneys. We're dealing with some of the most interesting First Amendment and Fourth Amendment precedents in the history of the United States. To raid a journalist, to point guns at reporters' heads and take their effects, their phones, their documents, just because you don't like them, is it's probably the most egregious violation of the First Amendment in the history of the United States. Because you think about it, there's no restitution. Once those government agents see who your sources are, they can't pay me $1 billion. People say, well, why don't you just sue them? There's no amount of money that the Department of Justice can give to me to make me whole after violating me like that. And frankly, violating our sources like that. And it does chill out people coming to us. I'm talking about whistleblowers now, not our undercover reporters. They'll never be deterred. But it deters sources from coming to you if those sources can be forcibly taken from you. And I think that's why Ben's there was one guy at the New York Times who came out and said journalists should not be cheerleading this raid against Project Veritas. It's wrong. It's principally wrong. And on some matters, we can unite, and that's one of them.
James, I need to hit a quick break, but I want to cover some other things with you, so please sit tight. More straight ahead. We're back now with our final moments with the heroic James O'Keefe. I want to talk to you about big tech because you've been suspended from Twitter. Big tech, which is an arm of the left, has taken all kinds of actions to suppress or suspend you, Project Veritas, etc. With Elon Musk now in charge of Twitter, how hopeful are you that your account will be restored? Do you want your account to be restored? And what's your overall view of Musk's management?
I do want my account to be restored. And the question behind your question really is on that is, do I want to be on Twitter? I want to be everywhere. I want to be covered by the New York Times. I want Project Veritas to be covered by CBS News, and we have to be covered by the mainstream media. We can't preach to the choir. We have to go where people are talking, and usually, whether that's Walter Cronkite in the 1980s or Peter Jennings in the 90s, or Telegram or Twitter, wherever people are talking, we should be there. So I want our account restored. Do I think our account will be restored? I do. I don't have any inside information. I don't speak personally to Mr. Musk, but I believe that the reasons we were suspended were so dubious, and I think Veritas is in a different category than the people that have been banned. We literally quote people, Monica. We show people's faces. I don't opine on things. I don't make bombastic political commentary. That's not who I am. I've never been that way. They banned us on Twitter because this is ridiculous. We were filming a video on the street, and our video camera happened to capture a glimpse of a lamp of a sign on someone's lawn with the number of the house. So they say that we doxed this person because the camera showed the number on the front of their home. And by the way, CNN does that all the time, and they're still on Twitter.
Right.
So I think that because the reason we were banned is so dubious, I think Elon Musk will have us on. I don't have any inside information, but that's my gut. In terms of Elon's management style, I guess he's trying to bring the company to profitability, and that's a management question. And I think he's had to take some radical steps, some radical moves, laying off half the company. I read a report about that. I don't know what's true and what's not, but Veritas has done a lot of reporting about the people at Twitter. Most famously, in the spring of this past year, we recorded a guy saying they're all communists there at Twitter.
Yes.
And we recorded a guy making real political statements. So it seems like there's a toxic culture in that place, and Elon Musk is trying to clean up the culture.
Well, the good news for you, and I'm sure you saw this a couple of days ago, James, is that Musk said that he wants Twitter to be an open platform for citizen journalists. You and Project Veritas have single-handedly created the modern version of that, so I am pretty confident you're going to get your account back. I think that's great news for Project Veritas and anybody out there who wants to take on the propaganda press and do the work that they should be doing.
Well, thank you very much, and I think he will have us on, hopefully soon.
I think so.
Listening, please bring us back on.
And I don't know this because I've never met Mr. Musk either, but he is, I think he's probably a big fan of Project Veritas because he's a guerrilla kind of guy. You know, you have a guerrilla army of citizen journalists out there, and he's sort of, you know, in the big tech world, he's one of these guys that doesn't fit a particular mold. And from that, I think he looks with great respect at you and Project Veritas. All right. Just finally here, James, what's next for Project Veritas, and where can people find you and Project Veritas on social media?
We're breaking stories almost every other day. I mean, we just did a story a few days ago in Westport, Connecticut, that got a teacher fired for his sexual comments about his underage students in the classroom. And that fallout is happening in Westport, Connecticut today. You can follow us on Instagram, Telegram, Facebook, YouTube. We're on all the channels except Twitter. We tend to trend on Twitter. Our story on Friday got 1 million views on Twitter. You might be asking, how is that possible if we're banned? That's because other people embed the clips and they download them from our Telegram page. So, you can also send us a tip, veritastips@protonmail.com. That's veritastips@protonmail.com. If you have a source or a tip or a lead, we have a team standing by at the ready, and you can go to our website, projectveritas.com. We are a tax-deductible nonprofit organization. We need financial donations to continue. We have no advertisers. No one tells us what not to do or what to do. We're truly independent, which is what journalism is supposed to be, without fear or favor. That's what journalism is supposed to be, and we're trying to emulate that. So go to our website, projectveritas.com today.
I just want to echo that to the audience that the propaganda press is corporate media. And when you hear the phrase corporate media, it's because corporations support them, fund them, and they take advertising revenue from corporations like Pfizer, for example. So Project Veritas does none of that, and they rely on independent contributions, donations to keep their really important work going. They are completely uncompromised because they don't take corporate money that could be tainted or connected to any kind of agenda. So please, whatever resources you have, time, money, whatever you've got, please go to projectveritas.com and support them however you can. The great James O'Keefe, again, a hero of this republic, and I am honored to call you a friend, James. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica.